in 2001, during the war in Afghanistan, when American media reported that a convoy in Afghanistan was hit by American planes because there was a tall man in the convoy. A reference at the time to perhaps bin Laden. In case you haven't heard, bin Laden was not killed. Now, Obama added something else to this picture. He threatened to use nuclear weapons against Iran, or not to rule it out, which is something that is, that has not received much attention in the press. His new nuclear strategy included that part, that he is willing to use nuclear weapons against Iran in the future. Now, he has also not been different from the Bush administration in disregard for free election. I mean, you disregard free election in two ways. Either by not pressuring governments that never have elections, like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Qatar, and various other dictatorships that are dear to the hearts of the United States, or by interfering in elections by rigging them, by money or covert operations to the side of America's puppets. And the Saudis have basically bought elections in Lebanon, as well as the recent one in Iraq. I mean, it was tough in Iraq because of sectarian balance. But, I mean, we don't have evidence for this. I don't have any evidence of this. But it seems, I mean, we're going to wait years before we find out that, in fact, the United States was behind intervention in the elections in both cases. I mean, in the case of Iraq, we don't need evidence to say America intervenes in every aspect. The puppet that the United States put in place in Iraq, Noor al-Maliki, has on occasions complained about American intervention in aspects of Iraqi policies. American advisors sit in parliamentary sessions. They interfere in the drafting of laws. In the case of Lebanon, you know that weeks before the elections took place, Joe Biden went there and gave campaign advice to the team that won, the right-wing coalition that wound up winning with small difference against the other side. And as you know, the New Yorker, among other newspapers, reported that the British used money in Iraq to influence election in favor of Iyad Allawi, the seeming winner in the last election in Iraq. So the third way of disregarding free election is basically not allowing free elections to take place if the outcome is uncertain or against America's puppets. The good case of the Palestinians. I mean, here the Palestinian leader, that's what he's called, Abu Mazen, whose term in office has expired last January, is still running around, accepted and treated as the elected leader of the Palestinian people. And the United States is not pressing him to have any new elections because they're not sure that he will win. I mean, these are three examples of disregarding free elections, and that's not different from the Bush administration. Another element is the continuation of support for Arab dictators throughout the region. And that has been a staple of American policy since, decades. On Arab-Israeli issues, again, we see not much change. I mean, there was a brief change in which two elements of Bush's Middle East policies were uttered. The first one is insisting that settlements be frozen for the preparation for negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That later was dropped. The second was the criticism by Hillary Clinton of demolishment of houses in Jerusalem, of Arab houses. That also stopped. So these were like exceptions to the rule. In reality, there's still the same elements of Bush's policies. Increased financial and military support for the collaborationist regime set up by Israel and the United States in Ramallah without any regard to elections anymore. And the support for repression in those areas to further the agenda of the United States and Israel in those regions. Second, waffling on formulations on settlements. Initially they were a condition. After Israel protested, they no more were a condition. Third is agreement with Israel that the Arab peace plan, which was an American Zionist plan from the beginning, which was conceived by Thomas Friedman, so that tells you about the plan. The notion that the plan is not sufficient or acceptable. I mean, Arab governments are begging for the plan to be accepted. The plan basically calls for full peace, full normalization with Israel, in return for return to 1967 borders. So that's another indication that the United States does not support the 242 resolution if it implies full withdrawal by Israel from West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, Golan Heights, and the Sinai. Not to mention Lebanon, because 242 does not talk about Lebanon, and Israel still occupies lands inside South Lebanon, where I come from. 4, insistence on pre-negotiation Arab concessions towards Israel. In other words, Arabs are expected to make concessions to Israel so that Israel will talk to them. I mean, historically, Arab governments were criticized because they don't talk to Israel. Now they're being asked, now the Arabs beg to talk to Israel, including the Syrian government. But now Arabs are expected to make concessions for Israel to talk to them. So they have to make concessions ahead of time. 5, continuation of the elevation of the status of Israeli-American strategic cooperation. Every administration takes it to a higher level, and Obama administration has not been an exception thus far. 6, forcing the Palestinians to accept Israeli conditions of no preconditions from Israel. So that's another example. 7, can you read my handwriting? Continuation and escalation of the effort to strangle Gaza. I mean, this administration has taken it to a higher level than under the Bush administration. As you probably have read about the Egyptian regime's effort to destroy all tunnels. 60% of the food needs of the poor people of Gaza comes through the tunnels. And American policy today and Israeli policy is to destroy all these tunnels. But of course the Palestinian people are so imaginative and so creative. No matter how many tunnels they destroy, they build new ones. It is estimated that the number of the tunnels are in the thousands. So when you read that they destroyed 2 or 3 tunnels, please don't be alarmed. They have a lot, many other tunnels. And we're talking about tunnels that are so well prepared, so well constructed. It's not like they're smuggling little packages. We're talking about cars, cows, cattle. I mean, large size, very large size. Not to mention the ability to smuggle the unmentionables. Now, the Egyptian regime is creating a barrier between Gaza and Egypt. The American Corps of Engineers of the US Army is the one who's doing that. This is Obama administration, not Bush. Now, at 8, Obama administration, like Bush, treating all enemies of Israel as enemies not only of the United States, but of the world at large. You see, Hamas used to be on talking terms with the Americans until Israel decided that it shouldn't be. That anybody who declares hostility to Israel should not be acceptable to the United States, and that has been the case. Cooperation, 9, cooperation, like, which was used to be the demand of the United States and Israel. Now, the Arabs are expected to recognize Israel as permanently a Jewish state. You know what that means? That Israel should always have a Jewish majority. Although the birth rate is very much in favor of the Palestinians because due to poverty they have a... Bush have a new rule that America will allow any tyrant in the region to allow his son to succeed him, provided that he prepares for the succession by making his ties to Israel closer and closer. The best case is Egypt. The United States now is aware of the rising tide against the succession of Jamal and Mubarak, and yet the United States has become quite silent about human rights violations in Egypt, and that's because he has been basically doing what Israel wants him to do in Gaza and elsewhere in the Middle East. But in fairness to Obama, unlike Bush, he does not speak about democracy. He does not. He doesn't mention it. Bush stopped speaking about democracy in the last year or two, but Obama, it doesn't figure much in his rhetoric. Now, conclusion, so that I'll give you a chance to speak and react. What is needed? I'm missing one page, I don't know what happened to it. Oh. What is needed? I mean, of course, it depends what one wants. Here, these are my preferences, for sure. I think that there's debate about whether that America needs to play a constructive role. Even critics of America in the Middle East or here speak about America need to be an honest broker. I mean, that's a cliche that was in vogue back in the 1970s and 80s. The United States does not say that anymore. Since the Reagan administration, the United States says we are not unbiased in the Middle East. We are biased in favor of Israel. They say that. And since Reagan, they say we are committed to a technological and military strategic edge by Israel over the combination of its Arab enemies or neighbors, all of them. So, I say we need to stop calling for America to be the honest broker. Instead, we should insist that America be excluded from any international effort to achieve peace in the Middle East, on any subject. I mean, I wish you know Arabic, because there's a line of poetry by Mutanabbi which speaks, فيك الخصام وأنت الخصم والحكم. The line goes as, the enmity is with you, and yet you want to be the arbiter. The United States cannot be the neutral observer when it is on the same side with Israel in the killing and oppression of the Palestinian people. The second element, some people want America not to stop its role in the Middle East. They want it to interfere constructively. I say, I mean, people always ask me, like, you know, you want America to be the police person of the Middle East? You want America to do this or that? No. I say what is needed for America not to do anything. I mean, to use American idiom, it is best for America to butt out of the Middle East region, to leave the region to its own people, to resolve their differences, to chart their own course of history. I think they deserve it, and they earn the right after years of conflict. And what that means is for America to pack and leave, to take its army and troops. But more than that, it means to stop selling arms to the region, to stop giving aid even. I mean, economic aid to the region is going to the coffers of the tyrants' families and their affiliate. I think that would help. Thirdly, I think it's important to end the peace process. What is called, since the 1970s, the peace process, is basically a war process. I mean, so many wars, invasions, occupations, and bombings have taken place under the peace process name, when no peace has ever been achieved. Unless you call the bought peace between the Egyptian dictatorship and Israel peace. But that's not a peace that speaks for the Egyptian people. So we should insist that this peace process means war, and it should be ended. Obama should be exposed as somebody who continued the Bush Doctrine, expanded on it, and built more wars in the region. And I think that should be stressed. And instead of trying to find evidence of peace or change, shift from Bush to Obama, the similarities between the two should be underlined. And I think that the lessons of the Bush administration should not be lost on us in evaluating the Obama administration, which is the same stubborn insistence on the language of force as a way to impose America's will, failed in the Bush administration and is failing with the Obama administration, and will continue to fail if there is another Obama administration. Thank you.
I have a question.
I'm listening.
Isn't it true that the Arabs and the Jews have been fighting for